So I think we'll get going. Just a couple more things before we finish off today. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Jason. I've been hiding in front of you behind the computer. We're just trying to get the live stream working all day. So we do have a reproducibility panel discussion coming up, but before that, I just wanted to kind of introduce Brainhack Western 2018, the event. So we started off yesterday with a day of talks from researchers at the CFMM, talking about MRI physics and diving into the details. Today we talked about data standards, open science, reproducibility. And then this weekend we'll be starting the hackathon. So tomorrow night there's a project pitch, and I'll go into this in a little more detail in a few slides. But before I do that, I do want to thank everyone who's come out, who signed up for the event, as well as all of our sponsors that help make this happen. So BrainScan for all their help with organizing this and providing us with the space. The CFMM for helping us with these 2 days. Sue for helping us, making sure we're well fed and caffeinated and hydrated. And of course, Western. So Brainhack Western is an official satellite event of the Brainhack Global 2018. And so Brainhack Global, from when I last checked, consisted of sites, or over 30 sites in 16 countries, over 1,000 participants over about a week or two period. And so earlier Patrick in his talk kind of talked about joining us on Slack, so if you haven't done so already, you can join us by entering your email in that link, and then joining the channel BHG18-Western. We've also been tweeting on Twitter using the hashtags BHG18 and Brainhack Western, as well as our website, brainhackwestern.github.io. So for 2018, the events really started last week in Montreal. So here you can see sort of their Brainhack going on with their discussions and their presentations and project pitches. To go into a little bit of detail for our site, from the people who signed up, here's just a distribution of sort of the population that we have. So we have about 68 graduate students, so that's masters and PhDs. 20% are staff, and that includes postdocs. 4% faculty, and then 8% undergrads. And this year, we've had participation from a number of different departments. So medical biophysics, biomedical engineering, neuroscience, computer science, physics. I think there's a few from chemistry. I think there's maybe one or two from statistics as well, and many more. And so in total, we had around 80 people signed up for this week of events. And so I won't go into detail about this because Dixon kind of mentioned it this morning already. But Brainhack, and what it really is to encourage this collaboration and introduce the ideas of open science methods to advance our research and brain science. And so this really facilitates the idea, our ideas and knowledge across different disciplines and different departments. And for this year, for 2018, our focus was really on data standardization, development, and education. And so you'll kind of see these themes throughout the rest of the week as well during our hackathon event. So we've heard a lot about bids today. This is a slide from, I think, Olivia's project pitch from last year. And just a few key things is just that, bids has extended beyond just MRI. You've heard stuff about EEGs. Now it includes, I think, PET, intracranial EEGs. And so there's many resources both online, as you saw from those drafts, documentations, as well as on site here. most of the organizers here have some familiarity with the bid structure, so we're here to help you throughout the weekend as well if you need any help with your conversion. Or you can always just email us afterwards. So I'll let Olivia talk a little bit about the prizes for our hackathon.
This will only take a minute. What would a hackathon be without prizes? Last year we did 3 prizes in tiers based on project novelty, project usefulness, and we had a PI come in and judge them. And this year, because we wanted to focus on bids and we really want people to adopt bids, not everyone has to become an expert overnight, not everyone has to become a bids developer overnight, and that's not the goal. So this year we're doing door prizes. So anyone who presents either Jason or I with a bids validator with some of their data, it could be one subject, it could be many, and can tell us what they changed this weekend. So what step they took to help bidsify their data. If you already have bids data, maybe it's that you figured out exactly how the events files worked and made sure that yours are correct. Like just make some motion towards adopting. Maybe it's starting the auto bids process with Ali. If you present Jason or I with that throughout the weekend, you'll be answered for one of $300 door prizes. And you can spend that on a pizza party for your lab now that you guys are adopting open science or whatever you like. We will have one judged prize for a novelty for $100 because there are some people trying to do bids extensions or provide, or people who are coming tomorrow who want to pitch data, who want, say, I want this data and I want to look at it, and those people deserve a prize too. And we've had a lot of speakers. So, and we're going to have more. So we're going to do a validated prize Sunday afternoon for the person, the teacher you like the most, just because we've had a lot of volunteers come out, and everyone who's spoken is just volunteering their time. So that's also a best of show award, I guess. And that's all. Said it wouldn't take long.
So as promised at the beginning, here's just sort of a breakdown of the next 3 days. So instead of starting at 9 tomorrow, we'll be starting at 5. And that's just checking in, making sure everyone has their name tags and they're registered. We'll have a brief welcome intro, sort of, I guess it'd be almost exactly the same as what you're hearing now. And then
We're going to start the intro at 5.
Which was at 5:30. Yeah. And then, thank you. And then after that, we will be having our project pitches and social, or I think as it's stated on the program, speed dating for projects. And so that's just where people kind of break, kind of walk around the room, get to know each other, get to know projects, and kind of see what they want to be involved in throughout the weekend. And then starting Saturday morning, we'll be having our hackathons, our hacking, and then at the same time, we will also be running tutorials. I believe there is a tutorial Saturday morning here in this room. And the best way to find out about these tutorials are really to be on Slack, because we'll be announcing all of them and posting them throughout the day on Slack. And then at 12, we'll be having lunch and then a conference. So I'll get into a little bit more about the conferences in a bit. But following that, we'll be having another session of hacking and tutorials and another conference, followed by dinner. And I think, did we decide on a location for a social Saturday night?
We're very organized here.
Yes. So to be determined. Yeah. So we'll be having a social event Saturday night. Location to be determined. And then Sunday morning we'll start off again with the hackathon or with hacking and tutorials. Again, followed by lunch, more hacking, and then we'll wrap up and have sort of these wrap-up presentations for our projects at around 3, and at that point we'll kind of go through and announce the winners for those prizes that Olivia mentioned before. So one thing that's not on the schedule is, because this is a global event, other sites also have talks. Some of them are live streamed or recorded. So if there is interest, we can always have those shown, whether it's here if the room's not used, or in one of the rooms upstairs that we have.
I think here makes sense, probably, and then the tutorials can be in the other meeting.
So I know there's at least 1 or 2 talks about deep learning, machine learning. There's a few talks on open science and reproducibility. So if there's interest, and we'll post a list of what's available so people can, if there's interest, they can let us know. So the conferences, what are they? So I think most of us know what a conference is, right? It's pretty organized. You know what talks are happening when and the topic. Well, unconferences are sort of the exact opposite. The topics or the discussion is kind of decided on site, either just prior to or at or during the time of the unconference. And so this is just a great way to present either new research or discuss research or other topics of interest. And so this is a great way to share or demo any new tools that you may have discovered or developing and using. You can share any news about resources or projects or data sets that you have. Invite collaborators to work with you on a project or spark some sort of discussion about a research topic. So one last thing before we get into our reproducibility panel is submit a project. We are still looking for more projects, and you can submit a project using the link that's shown in the middle of the slide here. And so I'd just like to stress that these projects don't need to be fully formed ideas. You can iron it out afterwards, even if it's something as simple as what you can contribute to a project or what you may be looking to do or learn from the rest of the week. So yeah, submit your projects. So when you go to that link, it'll take you to the wiki of projects on GitHub. And once you log into GitHub, you can just edit that page with your project. So with that, I guess it's time for the reproducibility panel discussion. So I'll just invite.
Can I just get the
Yep.
survey up?
Sorry.
Can I just get the survey up?
Yeah.
Yeah, just super quick. Please, the newer you are to bids and all this stuff, the more valuable your feedback is. So don't worry about typing out like paragraphs or stuff, but please, like this isn't just a one-time thing that we're doing. Like, of course, we here and we also beyond this would really like to make all of this more accessible for people. So please, I can't stress this enough. The newer you are, the more important your feedback is. So I will. I guess I don't really need HTML. Just realizing now, but it's the link. We'll be posting it on the. And we intentionally did not make all of the questions mandatory, so please fill out as much as you can, but don't worry if it's like too big of a hassle. So yeah, just please fill out as much of that.
Where can we find it on the slide?
On BHG 18-Western. Yeah.
Is the Google Doc right there?
Yeah, so if you just click on this, it should bring you to the survey.
Is this part of your summer code thing?
Yeah, it's part of it, but yes.
So is this in Tell Your Friends, Tell Your Family survey?
Yeah, anyone that is remotely something bids.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. So I guess with that, we'll wait a few minutes if people want to fill out the survey. Looks like some. Or do we just want to go into the room?
Jeez, I wonder if it would be helpful to just show the project page.
Yeah.
Just to
Yeah,
see,
I
because some people actually might not even have used
Sure.
GitHub, for example.
Yeah, so I know I provided a link there, but if you go to our website, there's a See Projects button right here. So if you click that, it takes you directly to our projects wiki. So here you can see we have, I think, 8 or 9 projects listed. And we'll go more into these tomorrow during the project pitch night. But if you're looking to edit the page, what you want to do is just sign in if you aren't signed in, which this computer is not. Do that really quick. And you can see here there's an edit button for the wiki. So if you click that, it brings you to this page, and so everything here is in Markdown. You can easily, if you're not entirely familiar with it, you can always copy one of the existing projects and just edit the text in there. And so here, all we're asking for is some sort of way to name or phrase to describe your project and a short description of it. And then if you're submitting a project, we ask that you prepare a short project pitch tomorrow for tomorrow night, just a couple minutes.
Do we need slides for the project pitches?
No, so slides are optional. So if you want slides, you can have 1 or 2 slides and just send them to me either through Slack or through the Brainhack.Western email. Otherwise, you can just come up here and talk for a couple minutes.
Can you throw up the bit.ly command?
Sorry.
Can you throw up the bit.ly command?
Yep. All right. So then with that, so I guess now we'll go to the reproducibility panel discussion. So I'll invite all the speakers from today back up, and I believe John will be moderating. Thanks, John.
Oh, you don't count, Jason?
Oh, okay.
Okay. So I was asked at the coffee break to moderate the session, but I'm happy to do this. I guess I'll introduce everyone again in case you don't know. Dr. Ali Khan, who's the PI involved in all this research. Olivia, who is a PhD candidate working with Dr. Ravi Menon in the CFMM. Dixon Wong, who's a PhD candidate working with Dr. Rob Bartha. Patrick Park, who is an undergrad in electrical engineering. He's been working in our lab and doing a really awesome work, and it's really kind of come together. As you've already heard, he's got a Google Summer of Code internship this summer, working on bids. And Jason Kai is a PhD candidate working with Dr. Ali Khan. So how should we open up the floor? I guess, let's see. I mean, obviously we have a very biased panel here at UMass. So, but I guess one thing, do you see any disadvantages with this sort of movement towards reproducibility? I mean, it seems like it's only good things, but can anybody speak to any of the potential challenges as we kind of move forward towards this line of work?
We can. Our data, so like open data is great, and compiling open data is super important. Like Biobank, which is a UK system that's getting a big queue, which I believe is 100,000 people scanned throughout their lifetimes, and they're scanning the healthy human population so that they can look at who develops diseases and stuff like that. And that's great, and that's amazing. But one thing that's hard is if you want to push the envelope with a kind of MRI technique, if you want to develop techniques, you still really need to be the person on the scanner messing with things, because if you want to do laminar fMRI, which is what my PhD is supposed to be about, you can't use anyone else's data. They don't publish it. There are a few data sets that are open that have sub-millimeter fMRI data, but you really need to be on a scanner so that you have control of the acquisition, so you have control of the analysis, and that means that it's limited to the sites with the capability, and there's no real way to make it open. So I guess if we're spending all our money on biobank and stuff, we're going to spend less of it on small studies that are really methods focused, be they on a scanner or in an electrode lab, and we have to focus on not forgetting that in our attempts to get, you know, this huge mean sample that's super powerful.
I guess just to add to that, there's always going to be, I mean, it's a sort of transitional area that we're in right now. We're sort of moving from more conventional science to science with more openness and reproducibility, but there's always the old guard around, and there are reviewers and you know, people that are hiring postdocs and faculty that don't either they don't believe in these, you know, new ideals, or they just don't value them as much as others. So there's always the risk of sort of, you don't want to put all your eggs in one basket. I mean, so you still have to be aware that, you know, there are, you know, journals out there that that are high impact and that that the community at large sees as major contributions that may not value open science the same way that we do. So just always be aware of the fact that not everyone sort of adheres to these principles yet. But I think it just takes time for people to sort of adapt. But you don't want to sort of lose out by sort of not doing research in a more traditional way, or disseminating in more traditional means. So.
Anybody else? Okay, well, just to keep things interactive, why don't we just kind of ask if any audience members have any questions?
I have a related question. So, not really about this, but more about like sharing data. So you say we have some old data that's not in this format, and we want to make it into whether this or other format that can be shareable among other research groups. I wonder who technically actually owns that data. Right. So if I'm a graduate student and I collect the data, I did most of my work, and then after I graduate, I move on to another place. Does my PI own the data, or I own the data? Can I publish new stuff on that data without consulting my PI, like former PI or not? Right? Or do I have to, make him a co-author, or some initial collaborator as a co-author, right? Mm-hmm. Or somebody else, totally unrelated, but we use my data. And I did all the work collecting all this data. Right?
And you're also forgetting just the study subjects too, right?
Yeah.
Do they retain ownership, right?
Yeah, and also the ethics protocol, right?
Yeah, this reminds me of some discussion that's been, I guess it's been quite heated at times, is the whole concept of data parasites. I don't know if you've heard that. I think it was in one of the major journals, either Science or somebody brought up this whole idea of, there are people who just profit from other people's data, and whereas, I do agree. Some people do, the actual act of acquiring data actually, in some ways, is underappreciated. So, there's a lot of work just to recruit and do those things, and if you just make it publicly available, and those people don't get anything out of it, that may rub certain people the wrong way. Right? So I don't know if anybody else has any comments on that.
Well, I guess to more directly address the question of, you have some retrospective data and you want to share it, like how can you do that? It's tricky. I think in a lot of cases it's actually it's impossible sometimes, depending on how the data was acquired, under what consent. The typical stance is that when you get ethics to do a study, you're getting ethics to do that particular analysis with your data. So you're not asking for sort of general use or to even share openly. So unless you have that built in when you acquired the data or started that study, it can be almost impossible to legally share it. But as far as, I mean, your question about student versus PI, I think the PI owns it.
So when it comes to like making like data available, like what do you think the time frame should be like that we make our data available? Like once we like satisfied with all the research, or like just after publishing one paper we make them available? What is the time frame we should think?
So we were talking about this at lunch, but a lot of other groups, some groups here at Western, what they'll do is they'll tie their data publication or their data sharing to a publication. So when they publish a paper, they'll also share the associated data with that paper. So you're getting what you wanted out of the data that you collected first before making it available to others. On a platform such as like Open Neuro, you can share the data out first before you publish anything. And what Open Neuro does is it gives you a 36-month time frame where you are the only person allowed to use the data. And then, I believe that's the case. But something like that. There's a time frame where you're the user, you're the exclusive user of the data.
But it's public,
But it's already publicly available. And then you publish on it, and then other people can use it. And then you can apply for 6-month extensions. Or if you don't publish within the 36-month time frame or within the extensions, then anybody else can use it after that expires. So there's some policies or guidelines out there for the length of time.
Yeah, if you want to like publish like 2-3 papers on the same data set, and like someone else do it before you, it's like disadvantage.
Yeah, so like when do you do it after your first paper or after your 10th paper on the data? Yeah. So I guess, yeah, so you have to decide how much you want to get out of the data before you make it publicly available. So,
I know when you try and publish using the same data set, journals like to see that you've done substantially something different with it. You can't just reuse the data, do something slightly different, and expect to get a new publication out of it. So that plays into how many publications you think you can get out of the data set before you publish.
So, I mean, you could use that to your advantage. Like, say you had a multimodal data set with fMRI and DTI. You did a DTI analysis, maybe just release the DTI data with that paper then. And then later when you do the fMRI analysis, add that as a sort of addendum. So you can split your data set up in terms of how it's being used, and that way you don't have to release everything at once and let it be free to the world. But.
And it also may depend on how like you develop your study, because I know that there are pipelines and stuff out there that are public, and with the increasing like amount of public pipelines, some of them kind of have this, like give and take. Okay, fine, like we're giving you the processing pipeline for free, but in exchange for using it, like we ask that you release your data after. So there's all these kind of give and take contracts, and so really it's a case by case basis based on like how you develop that study that you want to publish, and how many more you want to get out, right? Like, yeah.
Yeah, so we're talking a lot about sharing the data. So how do we get acknowledged for sharing this data? And then a follow-up question is there value into this acknowledgement? Like you get acknowledgements when you have a paper in a journal, but how valuable is it for this type of acknowledgement?
That's a good point. I mean, well, getting credit. Well, I guess the data papers is supposed to address this, like having something citable that you can put in your CV that people can cite in papers. But the problem still is that when someone's looking at your CV and sees that data paper, what do they consider that as equal a contribution as a paper in Neuroimage or somewhere else, right? So that's still, we're not there yet, I don't think. I think when someone sees a data paper, they still don't equate that with an actual journal paper that describes some studies. So, but hopefully that changes. I mean, I think there are some journals, data paper journals that are more impactful, or thought to be more impactful, but I think
So, I mean, yeah, some of the major journals like Nature now have scientific data. When you submit to certain Elsevier journals, there's data in brief, and so they kind of couple together with the idea of encouraging making the data available in a citable way. Like they usually have a DOI associated with the link as well. So I think that stuff certainly is more and more people who are interested in that.
The popularity of the big data collections is going to help that a lot. Like, think about how many things get published on HCP data. It's crazy. And people kind of view that as just a thing that's out in the world now. You can use the HCP data. And so the people who helped design those protocols, like they get, the people who were involved in that development are now names that all those people know, and that's got to be helping their CVs.
Yeah.
And bigger projects will help smaller projects.
And I think it's all about metrics too. I mean, so when you do something like that, make sure you're tracking how many people are downloading that data, how many people are citing it, how many people are actually using it. So if you can report those kinds of metrics, it makes it more impactful when you're up for your next job or whatever, or award.
We'll stick on that key theme there for a moment. So just in terms of getting recognized as you move into this reproducibility. So there's being recognized for data that you might have acquired. Then there's also, as you can see with these projects, whether it's auto bids, fMRI prep, there's lots of people involved. They usually kind of develop from events like this where you're getting people who don't normally work together. So I wonder if the panel has any thoughts or questions on how, I mean, you're just essentially having these huge collaborative groups. If you look at the co-authorship list on fMRI prep, or even if you look at the tools that fMRI prep depends on, there's a lot of things. So how do people still get credit appropriately for provide these tools to everyone else?
Yeah. I
can
just
take
use
it
their
if you want.
GitHub page. So.
I was going to mention there, especially the point of acknowledging software packages that then make use of other software packages, which make use of other software packages. How do you even know who to cite?
Yeah.
So there are actually some tools now. There's a Python tool that will, if you're using NiPipe, for instance, to build your pipeline, you can basically give it your pipeline, and it'll tell you exactly what papers to cite. So all the functions that you've used, everything that you've built into your work, it'll give you that list of things to cite. Because most of the time, I think the community in general does a bad job of citing methods works. We also don't cite, Microsoft for using their PCs, but should we be citing Compute Canada for using the resources? Yeah, I think we should be, but so it's hard to track that sometimes though. So I think I guess a word of advice is whenever you're building some tool, make it easy to cite. So provide some boilerplate code that has the references and everything you need to properly cite it.
One interesting thing I noticed is people don't cite their sequences. It's kind of an upstream thing, but some of the sequences that we use on the scanner all the time, we're supposed to cite in our papers. 2 papers when we use a certain fMRI sequence, because we're crediting that license because they're sharing it with us for free. It doesn't feel like it because Siemens has all our code locked down because they have to protect their copyright, but it is an example of open data, and people don't necessarily, they say we collected this using this sequence, but there's important details in those sequence papers about how they implemented Grappa, how they implemented this.
That's a good point. Actually, that's something that's a mini project to add that into our auto bids, right?
Yeah.
Next question.
Yeah, go ahead.
The acknowledging your sources for everything, it's very good. I'm just curious. So, what would be the consequences For example, a paper that doesn't remember to cite one particular paper. So is this just sort of a courtesy thing, or is this something that has some serious consequences in terms of your academic, trajectory? I mean, I'm all for it. It's just
Right.
how is it being enforced?
I think it gets enforced during the peer review process, right? Typically, you'll try and pick reviewers, or the journal might pick reviewers that are most relevant, and often those are the people that have developed some of the software that you happen to be using. So they'll catch it when they're reading your manuscript, like, oh, please use this more updated citation of that software. And I've had those comments come back. It's like, oh, you need to include these citations. So I think that's sort of built into the peer review process a little bit.
I would say it's probably not well enforced at all. And probably a lot of people are underciting, and the only, I mean, I guess, so the downside is for the person that's not being cited, right? So their perceived impact is much lower then. But I think in general, yeah, people are not citing as much as they should be, and it's, I mean, reviewers can't catch that all the time, right? And sometimes it's just sort of, just like, Olivia mentioned, like nobody cites all the sequences they use, right?
And not all the sequences
Yeah.
were required to cite. Like,
Yeah.
do you cite, like if we use a Siemens-based sequence, so it was provided to us by the manufacturer, do we cite Siemens? Siemens doesn't necessarily publish all their working papers.
Yeah.
They have lots of things they want.
But then the problem is that the academic system relies on that as a marker of productivity, so it's a bit broken, yeah.
Yeah, and then let's say the paper does manage to get published, and would it then be the fault of the editors and not the actual person who published, if that gets caught retrospectively?
I would only say the author would be the blame. I wouldn't put any blame on the reviewers or editors.
Yeah, unfortunately, there's no mechanism at that point. But this does touch on something that may be related that I don't think we've talked much about is this traditional peer review, which is you submit a paper to a journal and you have an editor who then distributes to a couple of reviewers. But then there's a movement towards kind of preprints. So the idea that you, at the time of or just before you submit to your manuscript somewhere, that you've essentially opened up peer review to whoever cares to notice your work. And so that mechanism means that you're not just limited to that really random sampling potentially, or bias sampling of a couple of peers, and then if it's open, then people have an opportunity to correct or comment on your work and say, hey, maybe you missed this reference, and so perhaps that is one way. I mean, because it hasn't really come up, I wonder what the rest of the panel how they feel about this preprint and its role in the reproducibility movement in neuroscience.
Are you talking about like pre-registering a protocol?
Well, pre-registering is one thing. That's
Okay.
just for your methods, but pre-print. So you have a paper that's
Right.
done and you're ready. It's actually ready to be submitted somewhere, but you can instead put it on the main tools that I'm aware of are bioRxiv and archive as being two places where you can just leave your manuscript.
I guess it's more of a crowdsourced peer review rather than the editor picking 3 or 4 people, right?
The editor will still, if you're submitting to a traditional journal,
Right.
still do the internal review, but you're also opening it up to the public.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's really good for opening access, so now people have access to that, but I haven't seen actually much review going on about preprints. Like we submitted preprints before, and like they get thrown around on Twitter, but there's no one actually like providing any critical comments typically. I mean, one of the risks with preprints is that becomes a citable object, and but it's not peer reviewed yet. right? So I see sometimes, like in papers, people are citing bioRxiv preprints as if they were peer-reviewed journals, or stating that a reviewer saying, why didn't you use this method, or this method's already done before, please see this bioRxiv. So it's a kind of, I don't know, it's a gray area, I think. Yeah, I'd be a much more, I think open review is probably a better idea, where the review is actually done in an open process. So +1 does that, or I think some other open access journals do that. But I still think it's a good way to get data out there.
And the pre-registration of the protocol, just to touch on that probably has much more of an impact on reproducibility, right? Because one of the factors that people talked about was that their methods weren't published in detail, or that there were, it was the analysis process wasn't adequate, or there were cases of fraud, perhaps, that, right? So that sort of, if you pre-publish a protocol and get the protocol reviewed, that could get rid of a lot of those issues that are barriers to reproducible science. And maybe by publishing those protocols first, they so any reviewers could actually catch those citations that you might need to make for the software packages that you need to use. So it might address that problem too, but I'm just speculating now, but
We're supposed to go to that. Moderate, but I don't have time. Is it,
So
I think
yeah,
we should just
probably
one last comment.
trying to wrap up.
Oh, yeah.
Oh,
one more comment.
There's a couple.
Two more
comments.
comments.
No, we can keep.
Encourage your collaborators
Yeah.
to use version control or other software practices that make reproducibility easier, especially your collaborators that are maybe already tenured.
I can partially answer that, even though I'm nowhere close to being tenured. Basically, trying to not use version control properly will actually come back and hit you in the face really, really fast. Like, you'll just think something is supposed to happen, and you'll swear like you reproduce all the steps to the best of your ability, and it'll just, your end image just won't be correctly registered or whatever, and it'll just be so evident that there's just no way around using proper version control, essentially. But I'm not sure if that entirely answers your question. Like, the results will so strongly, like, it's not really like a details thing. Like, if it was a details thing, then I guess they could get away with it, and in that case it would be okay. But in my experience, like, improper version control leads to like way more obvious like bad results than
how do you convince
you would
someone?
I think
You're preaching to the converted.
Yeah, exactly.
I know that.
But I just mean they would potentially like figure that. I don't know if they would figure it out themselves, but like it would show, right? So
I think one of the ways to do it is to push to centralize your software, right? Like, so in my lab, parts of our software are like 20 years old, and before I came into the lab, literally students were using different versions of the spectroscopy processing software locally on their computer. So I thought this was a problem coming as an engineer, and I was like, okay, so I started pushing the software to the servers, I was like, let's put the software there and we'll start with that. So it was like a gradual thing where it's like, oh, it makes it easier for new students to download it to their computer, right? So you start off with like, okay, that's the incentive. It's like people can still use it locally, but it's one place. It makes it easier for you to train a new student. And then you start updating the software on that central server, and everybody that's using it, it becomes much more efficient for them to connect to that most updated piece of software and use it rather than have it on their local machines. And then you sort of force the version control on them by having one place where it's maintained. I don't know if that's sort of how I've done it in our lab, but
Building it into the lab workflow. And
yeah, exactly. So gradually building
Just
it
do it
into the
yourself,
training.
basically.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah, I guess it's, just take the effort and just do it yourself.
Yeah.
Force
And
it
then-
on them. Yeah.
Now when other people use our software, right, we give them the GitLab link to download the software, and then they're automatically using a version controlled piece of our software. So yeah, that's how we've done it, but
That's like maybe your collaborators use version control, but that's like you're not getting anything back. So you can say
Right.
that all of my stuff is the right version, but if elsewhere in the world little tweaks are made to it, you can't save those, which is
right.
where I'm at.
Is that where containers come in? And that's where
Yeah,
instead
I don't
of
know.
offering
You gotta make it
code,
easier, I think.
but you have a specific version. Would that be correct
Yeah.
in saying that at least you'd be forced that they'd be using a specific version? It may not be the most up to date version, but that you'd know in a sense what you've deployed for them. Like certain users, you don't want them to have that sort of access because they may not be, capable or necessarily be able to use version control.
I wonder if you even have to like build it into your collaboration agreement where if you make changes to your code, you have to submit it to this repository or things like that. If they don't buy into this, there's no good way of convincing them, I think.
I have one passive aggressive way of convincing them. It's not very nice, but I think it's something I don't do that I know I should do every day. So, and that would be like deploying tests. So like for NiPipe, I don't have a test to test that my interfaces do anything more than run correctly. Like, give them the correct inputs, they run. That's the extent of the testing that happens. But for other things like the inter-echo variance thing for combination, for example, you could be like, look, I've developed all these beautiful tests, and when you send me something, I'm going to run it on these tests, and if they don't work, you have to explain to me why. And that's super passive aggressive, for sure. It's not a good idea, but it would at least give you an idea of both where they changed, and it would be something that you could build into version control, so it would be like a carrot opposed to a stick, because you can build testing into GitLab and GitHub so that it just auto runs when they go, and so then they can test it against other cases. But if it's just, I don't want to adopt GitLab, I don't know. Lots of people don't want to adopt GitLab. Lots of people don't want to adopt NiPipe. If I knew how to make them do it, I'd be somewhere else right now.
You can get them to come out to events like these.
Okay, any last burning questions from anyone? Well, let's thank
One more.
Yeah.
So we have data from different places, different centers, different scanners. Ideally, we always want to combine forces to get the best results of all of them. However, we know that every scanner has their own properties, every center has their own processing pipelines. How are we able to ensure the quality that's consistent across all sites, and even better, how to collect multimodal data that kind of a brighter picture for use in the future? For example, if we have MRI, but some centers are more specifically collecting biodata, and with that, we can also study a lot more correlation than just simply looking at evolution of the brain and stuff like that.
I would say good QC. So like in MRI, we have MRI QC, and we have other forms of quality control. And whenever you're comparing the same data across sites, be it with different sequences or not, you can do quality control and center and scale your data, and make sure that you are seeing good within site, like everything's consistent within site, and then between sites have an idea of the difference. I don't work with, I only work with MRI data, so I can't speak to multimodality data
But
at this point.
Yeah, I'm not sure about multimodal data either, but you're absolutely right. Like, it's a huge issue, and like people are looking into it in terms of studies, and like they're finding exactly that it's not standardized at all. So is like a huge problem, but like at the same time, like there's like ways to control for it. Like of course there's like the use of standardized like phantoms, or there's pipelines that can compare differences between each one to at least, I mean, you're not going to change a scan after it's been done, but at least you'll be aware of what differences there are between sites. And as for now, I guess it's the best. Yeah.
And I mean, some recent studies are showing that having multi-site data with multi-site differences actually could improve the generalizability that you get from that. So, you know, training your models using all this multi-sensor data, which could be quite variable, just makes your model potentially more robust because you're giving it this variability to learn. So, I mean, because there's only so much you can do to sort of try to harmonize things. There's always going to be differences. So I think just learning from those differences is probably the best you can do to make generalizable models. All right.
Okay, well, let's thank the panel again.
Okay, so that concludes
Day two.
Day two,
Brainhack
yeah.
Western.
See everyone Friday at, what's it, 5:30? 5. We will have snacks and things like that, so if you come at 5, there will be food.